I hadn't meant to notice her that way, really, I hadn't, but the first time I saw her, she made it impossible not to. My girlfriend's aunt, Anna, was leaning against the kitchen counter, a glass of wine in her hand, and the way the dim light traced the curve of her jaw made her look almost untouchable. I, 20 years old and fumbling through adulthood, was painfully aware of every detail. The way her hair fell across one shoulder, the faint scent of jasmine lingering in the air, the soft creak of her boots on the hardwood floor, all of it felt like it existed just to draw me in. She caught me staring. Her lips curved in a half-smile, not mocking, just knowing. "Do I make you uncomfortable?" she asked, tilting her head. The question sounded casual, but there was a weight behind it, a challenge. I shook my head, because what else could I say? My throat felt dry, and my fingers itched to fidget with anything, my watch, my hoodie string, anything to stop myself from staring too blatantly. "I hope you're not one of those boys who only notices what's obvious," she said softly, stepping closer. And closer felt like stepping into a quiet storm. Her presence was warm, like sunlight through a window I hadn't noticed until now, and suddenly, the kitchen felt smaller. I could feel her hand brush mine, not deliberately, maybe just passing by, but it lingered, just an instant too long. My chest tightened, a low, quiet drum in my ribcage that I couldn't quite ignore. "You always stand there like a statue," she said, shaking her head lightly, though her eyes didn't stop tracing me. "It's unnerving, and fascinating." I laughed nervously, shifting my weight. Words felt useless here, the room was too full of something I couldn't name. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was something sharper, more magnetic. Anna leaned against the counter, closer now, her perfume mixing with the faint scent of coffee from the machine. Every subtle movement she made seemed deliberate, her hand brushing her hair, the slow turn of her head, but somehow effortless. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. And when our eyes met, the silence stretched long enough to feel like its own conversation. There was a sudden vulnerability in her smile, too, a fleeting shadow behind the confidence. It made her human, made her real. And maybe that was what hooked me most. She didn't feel like an untouchable idea, she felt like a person standing just close enough that I could see the cracks, the warmth, the pull. She reached for a mug, and our hands touched again, lightly, brushing fingertips, but it was enough to make me shiver. "Don't tell anyone," she murmured, almost to herself, almost teasing, almost a confession. The words hung between us, heavier than the air. My heart stuttered. I wanted to ask what she meant, wanted to lean closer, wanted everything. But before I could, the sharp click of a front door opening sliced through the tension, and we both froze. Her eyes met mine, wide for a fraction of a second, and then she looked away. The charged warmth lingered in the space between us, unspoken, unresolved. I didn't move, didn't speak. And I knew, deep down, nothing would ever be quite the same. After that night, the image of her didn't leave me. Anna moved through my thoughts with the ease of someone who had been in the world longer, carried herself like she belonged everywhere, and nowhere at once. I kept replaying the way her hand had brushed mine, the soft lilt in her voice when she said, "Don't tell anyone." Every time, my chest tightened like a fist. I knew I shouldn't feel this way. She was my girlfriend's aunt. She was, older, experienced, luminous in a way that made me feel both clumsy and exposed. And yet, the pull was magnetic, insistent. I caught myself studying her during our next visit, noticing things I shouldn't, how the slight crease near her eyes deepened when she laughed, the delicate arch of her collarbone beneath a thin blouse, the way her fingers unconsciously tapped the rim of a coffee cup. I tried to look away, tell myself it was curiosity, harmless observation. But it wasn't. Anna, too, seemed aware of the current humming between us. She lingered just a little too long when handing me a plate, her shoulder brushing mine in a way that could be passed off as accidental. Her eyes often held mine a fraction too long, the light in them flickering in a way I couldn't read. One night, I thought I caught her watching me from across the room, alone for a moment, her expression softening, not judgmental, not teasing, just searching. There were hints of vulnerability beneath her confidence. She spoke sometimes about her past relationships, in a way that made me notice the pauses and hesitations. "I've been impatient, I guess," she said once, swirling the wine in her glass. "I've let things slip through my fingers." The words seemed casual, but her fingers tightened around the stem of the glass, knuckles pale. I wondered if she had regrets, if loneliness had crept in unnoticed, softened the edges of her usual control. And then there was me. 20 years old, fumbling with adult feelings I didn't fully understand. I'd had relationships, of course, but none like this, none that made my stomach twist with anticipation at the brush of a hand, or my chest swell with longing from a glance. I noticed her in ways I tried to hide, like when she leaned toward me to whisper a joke and her hair tickled my ear, or when her perfume caught me off guard, enveloping me in warmth that wasn't entirely innocent. The age gap was there, a quiet wall in the background of my mind. The social risk was there too. But the tension, the almost painful magnetic charge, made everything else feel distant, irrelevant. Still, I found myself hesitating, holding back words, thoughts, and touches that felt dangerously close to confessing. It was during one of those quiet afternoons, while she showed me a book of old photographs, that it happened. We sat shoulder to shoulder on the couch, the sunlight drifting across the room in lazy streaks. I could feel her warmth, her body just close enough to make me hyper-aware of mine. My hand brushed hers as I turned a page. She didn't pull away, and I almost wanted her to. Instead, she stayed there, letting the brush linger, letting our fingers hover together in a small, wordless conversation. Her breath caught subtly as she leaned closer to point at a picture, and I felt it, her warmth, the soft exhale against my neck. My heart thudded against my ribs, rapid and clumsy. Neither of us said anything, neither of us moved. The air between us was electric, humming with the unspoken. Finally, she shifted, resting her hand briefly on my shoulder, just a fraction too long. I felt my throat tighten, and I swallowed hard, trying not to betray the storm inside me. She didn't speak, she didn't have to. That small, quiet touch, light, fleeting, intentional, was enough to deepen the bond that neither of us wanted to name. When she finally leaned back, her eyes met mine, a faint, knowing smile tugging at her lips. I wanted to reach out again, but I didn't. And yet, the space between us felt smaller, charged, as if we both knew we were teetering on the edge of something that could never be fully contained, and neither of us wanted to step back. The moment began quietly, the kind of quiet that hums with possibility. We were alone in the living room, the late afternoon sunlight slanting through the blinds, painting lines across the carpet. Anna sat near me on the sofa, our knees nearly touching. I tried to focus on the book she held, but my attention kept drifting to the tilt of her head, the curve of her lips, the warmth radiating from her shoulder. She noticed, of course. I could feel it in the way her fingers brushed mine when she passed me a page, deliberate just enough to make me catch my breath. Her gaze lingered, and I found myself holding it longer than I should, both of us dancing around a line we couldn't name. Then, the phone buzzed on the coffee table, sharp and intrusive. I jumped slightly, and Anna's hand twitched in a way that mirrored mine. She picked it up, glancing at the screen with a half-smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's just a message from your girlfriend," she said, though the corner of her mouth curved with something unreadable. We both knew we should have laughed it off, pretended it meant nothing, but the tension didn't break. The small room felt smaller, charged, like we were breathing the same air with electric currents threading through it. Our knees brushed again. I shifted slightly, trying to pull back, but she didn't move. Instead, she leaned just enough that I could smell the faint perfume at her neck, the warmth of her breath when she whispered, "Do you always notice everything?" I swallowed, my pulse spiking. I don't mean to," I admitted, my voice low, rougher than I expected. Her eyes softened, but only slightly, and the corner of her lips twitched as if amused and frustrated at the same time. She reached out, just a finger grazing my hand, and I froze, feeling the tiny electric shock travel up my arm. There was a moment, a long, trembling heartbeat, where it could have happened. My mouth opened, hers tilted toward mine, and for a second, the world outside the room ceased to exist. But then, the sound of the front door opening echoed faintly from the hall. We both flinched, the spell breaking just enough that reality seeped back in. Guilt prickled at my ribs, fear at my chest. Social rules, loyalty, the absurdity of what we were even feeling, it all slammed into me at once. And yet, I couldn't pull away entirely. Anna's hand lingered on mine, just an inch too close, and I felt her inhale sharply, quiet but deliberate. "We shouldn't," she murmured, words unfinished, carried off by the tension thick between us. I wanted to argue, to say that maybe it didn't matter, that maybe the world could wait. But I didn't. I just watched her, feeling the warmth of her body pressing closer than ever, my own heartbeat loud enough to drown out the caution in my head. Her eyes caught mine, wide and unguarded, and I realized neither of us was stepping back. The room was too small, our bodies too near, the unspoken magnetism impossible to resist. For a fleeting second, time slowed. Her lips were almost there, so close I could feel the faint brush of her breath against mine. The guilt, the hesitation, the fear of discovery, everything told me to move away. But my body didn't. My hands didn't. And neither did hers. When the door clicked shut again somewhere else in the house, we stayed like that, suspended, pulled closer than ever, neither daring to move, neither daring to break the tension. It was terrifying and thrilling all at once, and I knew, without a doubt, that the line we'd been dancing around for weeks was about to shatter. I didn't think I could stand it any longer. The waiting, the stolen glances, the tiny brush of her hand against mine, it was too much. The world narrowed to the curve of her shoulder, the warmth radiating from her, the soft exhale that carried the faint scent of jasmine and something uniquely hers. We were in the small study this time, the kind of room where walls seemed to press in, amplifying every heartbeat, every whispered breath. She sat across from me, legs tucked to the side, and I caught myself staring again, feeling shame prick along with desire. "I can't stop thinking about you," I blurted, voice lower than I meant, words tumbling before I could swallow them. Anna froze, her hand stilling on the stack of papers she'd been pretending to organize. Her eyes widened, just slightly, a flash of something raw in them, shock, fear, maybe relief. Then she exhaled slowly, almost imperceptibly, leaning forward in a way that made my chest tighten. "I don't know if I should be saying this," she whispered back, voice barely more than breath. Her fingers brushed a stray lock of hair from her face, and the gesture, casual on the surface, felt deliberate in a way that made my stomach twist. I leaned a fraction closer, drawn magnetically. My hand hovered near hers, unsure whether to bridge the gap or pull away. Her eyes followed, unwavering, holding me like she could see every thought I tried to hide. "You're reckless," she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips, though her voice trembled slightly. "Do you have any idea what we're doing?" "I don't care," I admitted, the word surprising even me. My pulse hammered in my ears, a rapid, clumsy drum matching the chaos in my chest. "I just can't stop." The distance between us shrank imperceptibly, until I could feel the heat from her body, the subtle sway of her breath against mine. Her hand lifted slightly, a hesitant motion, brushing my cheek, not enough to be a kiss, not yet, but enough to ignite every nerve ending. Her lips parted, as if to speak, and I caught the faintest whisper of her perfume. Time seemed to falter, each second stretching long, tremulous, heavy with anticipation. My hand twitched near hers, fingers aching to touch, to anchor, to cross the invisible line that had been pulling taut for weeks. "I shouldn't," she started, then faltered, her voice cracking just enough to make me inhale sharply. The ache between us had become unbearable, the kind of tension that makes your skin feel too tight, your chest both heavy and light at the same time. I wanted to say her name, wanted to pull her closer, wanted to feel her lips on mine, even for a moment that might never come again. Her gaze dropped for a heartbeat, then returned with a boldness that startled me. "If we do this, there's no going back," she murmured, voice low, trembling just enough to betray everything she was holding in. "I know," I said, and the confession felt like a surrender, a challenge, a prayer all at once. The space between us shrank further. Our foreheads almost touched. Her hair brushed against my hand as I reached to tuck it behind her ear, slow, careful, and yet trembling with desire. Her breath hitched, a soft sound that went straight to my chest. I leaned in, ever so slightly, and she leaned toward me, mirroring, matching. The world contracted until it was just us, the warmth, the scent, the electric pulse that hummed between skin and skin. And then, just as my lips hovered a breath away from hers, the sharp click of the door handle echoed through the study. We froze, hearts hammering, lips inches apart, the impossible moment suspended in midair. The house was quiet again, deceptively quiet, the kind of silence that made every small sound echo, every footstep, every shift of weight. I thought we were alone, safe, but I was wrong. Anna and I had retreated to the kitchen, trying to convince ourselves that a glass of wine and casual conversation could mask the tension between us. But the room hummed with it anyway. I noticed how her fingers wrapped around her glass, knuckles pale, how she shifted in her chair, one leg brushing mine in a way that made my stomach lurch. "I didn't know, she's been asking questions," Anna said suddenly, her voice low, almost secretive. She didn't meet my eyes at first, instead staring at the rim of her glass like it held the answers. "Who?" I asked, my pulse spiking. "My sister. She called me last night, asking if I'd noticed anything between us. If something was going on." Her voice faltered slightly, and I felt a jolt of panic sharpen my chest. I tried to swallow the sudden rush of fear. The possibility of being discovered, of being judged, it made my palms sweat. My fingers brushed hers when I reached for the wine bottle, an accidental contact that made both of us flinch, then linger. I didn't tell her," she added quickly, and the relief in her voice was palpable. Yet the tremor in her hand betrayed something deeper, maybe guilt, maybe desire, maybe the thrill of danger. We both sat in silence for a moment, the weight of her words settling like dust in the room. The risk of exposure made every inch of her feel sharper, more intoxicating. Her hair fell over her shoulder, brushing against mine when I leaned slightly to pour the wine, and I shivered involuntarily. "Do you feel it too?" she asked finally, voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes caught mine, searching, challenging, vulnerable all at once. I nodded, unable to speak. My throat had dried up. My heart hammered in my chest, echoing in the tiny space between us. She leaned forward, her shoulder grazing mine, the contact light but enough to ignite every nerve ending. I wanted to tell her, to confess, to erase all the rules that had kept us restrained, but my words caught in my throat. Her gaze dropped for a second, and then she lifted it, meeting mine with a daring intensity that made me stumble inwardly. "I shouldn't want this," she murmured, lips parted slightly, the faintest tremor in her voice. And yet, her hand lifted subtly, brushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear. My fingers twitched toward her, almost involuntarily, craving the warmth of her skin. We froze, both aware of how dangerously close we had become. Every brush of clothing, every shared breath felt like a secret signal, a pulse of electricity neither of us could ignore. I can't pretend it's nothing anymore," I admitted finally, voice low and shaky, and it felt like a confession and a surrender rolled into one. Her lips curved in the slightest, a mixture of relief and something wilder, darker, more daring. She leaned closer, just enough that her breath brushed my cheek, and I felt my heart stutter. My hand hovered near hers, shaking, trembling, desperate to close the gap, to reach for her, but I froze again. The revelation, that someone might know, that the walls we thought were private were already thinner than we realized, made the air between us charged. Suddenly, what had felt safe before was risky. The thrill of danger sharpened everything, her warmth, the closeness of her body, the way our hands hovered together like magnets. We didn't speak for several long moments. Instead, our eyes held, hearts hammering in synchrony, our breaths mingling in the narrow space between us. Finally, Anna's hand twitched, moving just enough toward mine that I could no longer resist. My fingers brushed hers again, this time intentionally, slowly, as if testing the boundaries of what we could allow. She didn't pull away. Neither did I. And in that moment, I realized the decision had been made, not consciously, not with words, but in every tremor, every glance, every shared heartbeat. We were moving toward the inevitable. There was no turning back now. The room felt smaller than ever, the kind of tight space that made every heartbeat echo, every breath impossible to ignore. Anna was there, mere inches away, her shoulder brushing mine as if the distance itself had become unbearable. I could feel the warmth radiating from her, smell the faint perfume clinging to her hair, taste the tension hanging between us. Her eyes held mine, dark, searching, daring. The world outside, the rules, the warnings, the fear of discovery, faded until it was just her, just me, suspended in a moment that felt infinite. My fingers twitched, hovering near hers, desperate to bridge the space but afraid of what surrender might mean. I shouldn't, she whispered, voice low, trembling slightly, the words almost lost in the charged quiet. I know, I said, barely above a breath, but I can't. My own voice faltered, raw with longing, unfinished. We lingered like that, drawn together by something neither reason nor fear could untangle. Every brush of skin against skin, every shared inhale, every subtle shift of weight pressed the choice into my chest like a pulse, move closer, or step away forever. Her hand brushed mine, deliberate, electric, and I felt a shiver run through me. She leaned slightly, enough that our shoulders met fully, our breaths mingling in the small space between us. I wanted to close my eyes, lean in further, let the moment carry us beyond hesitation. Yet, part of me hesitated, caught between desire and the gravity of what could happen if we crossed the line. Do you really want this? She asked, her lips barely parted, her gaze locking with mine. Not teasing, not rhetorical, her question carried the weight of truth. I do, I admitted, voice low, shaking, unpolished. More than I can explain. Her fingers twitched against mine, then curled around them slowly, anchoring me, holding me there. My chest tightened, my pulse deafening, and something inside me gave in, because waiting any longer felt impossible. We didn't speak again. Words would only break the fragile tension. Instead, she leaned toward me, and I mirrored her, letting the small, deliberate closeness do what speech could not. My hand lifted, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, lingering along her jaw, feeling the softness of her skin beneath my fingertips. She inhaled sharply, tiny tremors running through her body, and I realized we were both holding our breath, suspended on the precipice of a decision that had been building for weeks. The world had narrowed until it existed only in the warmth of her shoulder, the brush of our hands, the small, careful steps that brought us impossibly close. Then, without warning, she pressed a whisper to my lips, so close it counted as contact, a promise, a surrender, but not fully. The faintest, teasing graze, enough to ignite every nerve, enough to tell me we were crossing into territory neither of us could deny. I've been waiting, she murmured, voice trembling yet firm, and I can't pretend it's not real anymore. I closed the final gap, leaning in until our foreheads touched, our breaths mingling, feeling the raw, messy, human truth of her presence. Every hesitation, every fear, every stolen glance had led here. I felt her hands rest lightly on my chest, steadying herself, or me, and I realized that in this moment, we understood each other fully, without pretense, without fear. The choice had been made, not just to cross the line, but to acknowledge what we were, who we were to each other, and the irrevocable pull between us. In that quiet, trembling silence, we simply existed together, the tension dissolved into understanding, and the world outside could wait. The room smelled faintly of coffee and late afternoon sunlight, soft and grounding, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a kind of peace settle over us. Anna sat beside me on the couch, her hand resting lightly over mine, fingers intertwined in a way that felt both tender and impossible to untangle. No words were necessary, we had crossed the impossible line, and now the quiet closeness carried all the weight we'd been holding back. I noticed the small details I hadn't allowed myself to before, the gentle way her hair fell across her shoulder, the warmth of her palm against mine, the tiny laugh lines that softened her usually poised expression. Age, social expectations, the guilt of what-ifs, it all seemed irrelevant now. She was here, she was real, and we were here together. "You're quiet," she murmured, resting her head lightly against my shoulder. The soft weight of her hair brushing against my neck sent a shiver through me, not from desire alone, but from comfort, from finally feeling seen. I just can't believe this is happening," I admitted, voice low, breath steadying. "That we're actually here." Her fingers squeezed mine gently, a grounding motion that spoke more than words ever could. "Neither can I," she whispered back, and the vulnerability in her tone made my chest ache in the best possible way. We sat in silence for a while, letting the room fill with the quiet rhythm of two people who had finally let go of pretense, fear, and hesitation. Every brush of her hand, every shared glance, every subtle shift of weight was a conversation without words, a promise without speaking. At one point, she lifted her head and pressed her forehead to mine. The connection was small, intimate, grounding. I felt her breath against my skin, soft and warm, and I realized that all the stolen moments, all the tension and near misses, had been leading to this gentle, human closeness. "Does this feel real to you?" I asked softly, not needing an answer immediately. Her smile was faint but certain. "It does," she said, leaning closer, letting our hands stay intertwined, letting the closeness linger. There was no rush, no need to define everything at once. Just the warmth, just the quiet certainty that we had crossed the space between desire and something lasting. I realized then that the age gap, the societal expectations, all the hesitation, they didn't matter in the context of this moment. We had acknowledged the risks, faced the temptation, and chosen each other anyway. That choice, messy and human, felt more real than anything else. Finally, I rested my head beside hers, our hands still intertwined, and let myself breathe in the rhythm of her presence. We didn't need words. The room was soft, the sunlight fading gently, and everything felt exactly as it should. We stayed like that for a long while, two flawed, human people, connected in a way that had been impossible to articulate, yet undeniable in its quiet truth. And in that simple closeness, I understood her completely, and she understood me. The world outside could wait. We had each other, finally, fully, and the warmth of that realization was enough to fill every space between us. 6.